Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Climate, a podcast where we talk about climate change and how it relates to all of us. Join us, Change the Chamber Fellows, as we talk with scientists, grassroots campaigners, politicians, and more to open up the conversation on climate. I'm your host, Mary Crockett, and today we're talking about something that is pretty relevant this early in 2025, and that's wildfires. You'll hear from Elizabeth Blake, research assistant at the University of Washington, as I ask her questions about her work creating a National Wildfire Dataset.
I think the biggest thing is almost even starting at the community level, which is what I find most important, and just being able to give data back to the people.
On January 7th this year, horrific wildfires erupted across the city of Los Angeles, in total burning about 38,000 acres of land. 29 people were killed, and estimates of total economic loss are over $250 billion. Since the 1980s, the extent of area burned by wildfires across the country seems to have increased. The period of 1984 to 2000 saw about 1.69 million acres burned over 11 states. In that same area, it doubled in size to nearly 3.35 million acres from 2001 to 2018. The National Interagency Fire Center says that of the 10 years with the largest acreage burned, all have occurred since 2004. So we can see a trend, and that trend is pretty apparent in California, which has the largest history of wildfires in the country. 15 of the 20 largest wildfires in California history have occurred since 2000. So that's, for reference, my lifetime as a 24-year-old. Despite all of this, I don't think anyone was prepared for them to trespass into the city of Los Angeles, which is a surprise because LA has the highest population density per square mile in California, and nearly 85% of wildland fires in the United States are caused by humans. But to be fair to us humans, the likelihood that a campfire left unattended, or equipment malfunctions, or a randomly discarded cigarette causes a fire has increased because of, you guessed it, climate change. Climate change has led to trends of increased heat, and higher temperatures lead to drought, not just by reduced precipitation, but also greater evaporation. A study by UCLA and NOAA scientists has found that evaporation accounted for 61% of California's drought severity, while reduced precipitation accounted for only 39%. Additionally, there's the lack of moisture in fuels, lack of humidity. Scientists measure this in vapor pressure deficit, VPD, which is just a measure that tells us how thirsty the environment is. And VPD has gone up. Some might say the flux is attributable to natural factors, which it could be, but one study found that 2/3 of the VPD trend is explained by anthropogenic warming. The trifecta create an environment ripe for fire to start and spread, and it's sometimes difficult for people to see the direct impact. We can only expect to see the wildfire trend go up, and solutions across the board are needed. Luckily, people are working on them. My good friend Elizabeth is one of those people. Today, I've asked her to come and speak with me about her work. So, could you tell us a bit about yourself and the project that you're working on?
I have been working for Dr. Joan Casey at the University of Washington as her research assistant. She's an environmental epidemiologist. We do a lot of spatial temporal analyses, mapping, studies, and that type of stuff to really see how people are impacted by extreme weather events, whether that be wildfires, heat waves, a little bit of hurricanes, less because we're in the Pacific Northwest. But wildfires is a big one. And a main outcome we look at is neurodegenerative diseases such as dementias, related dementias, and Alzheimer's. The project I'm working on right now that we're wrapping up is creating a national spatial wildfire burn zone data set with the ultimate goal of other people being able to use it. It's from 2000 to 2019, and we have things in place to keep it updating basically and add new information and new data when it comes in, and then making all of this information available to researchers everywhere. The team actually posted the data set like 2 days ago on Harvard's Dataverse, and it apparently already has 45 downloads. I'm like, wow, that's crazy
Wow.
global.
That's good. So where are you getting most of this data from?
The data is coming from multiple different locations. There are about five main sources that we've been pulling from, multiple different government organizations, mostly within the Homeland Department. So, like the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, FEMA is involved too, and they have data that we pull from because all of these, depending on where the fire is, the person whose land it is controls it. And so a big place we're getting data from is specifically California's wildfire database. It's called Red Books or Cal Fire. And it's a great example because of how long and how standardized California has become with collecting wildfire data information because it's so much more frequent there that it's almost like literally its own source. But most of these, slash all of them, rely on like satellite imagery to capture burn zones and then are creating um, GIS layers that we can then download.
So in Los Angeles, we already know that the air quality has been degraded by these fires, and we're watching as, these massive planes are dropping seawater onto the fires, and we're watching as wildlife that called these mountains their home are now roaming the streets of the Palisades, trying to find a place to go. I'm wondering if you could, from your research, tell us a little bit about the ecological impacts, but also the environmental health, the public health impacts of these fires.
Yeah, I can definitely speak more on the health. I do much less ecology nowadays, slash none. Um, but I do, but I'm a well-versed woman. And I do know, in general, these burning events aren't something incredibly foreign to natural landscapes, and that's something I think that's important to remember that it is very common or like natural, I should say, for there to be like burn events, lightning happens, um, and then you can even go into talking more about controlled burns. But I think the issue with that is that it is the way of life and it's the turnaround of an ecosystem, which is natural, whereas this is human spurred extra, which is like causing increased biodiversity disruption, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, which is impacting, as you were saying, there are animals everywhere, which then leads directly into public health concerns because the wildlife urban interface has been decreased because of these fires. There are kind of two prongs to the wildfire in terms of like public health and health impact, where it's like there's the actual physical burned locations, people's houses coming down, kind of the emotional trauma that goes with that too of being in a fire. But then as we know that like the smoke then carries, it's impacting an entire coastline perhaps, or like it's going all the way to Michigan. Exposure to wildfire smoke and the particulate matter that is involved in wildfire smoke burning is horrible for our brains. It can lead to oxidative stress. It can lead to inflammation. It can lead to like cell necrosis, basically, of brain cells just dying. Um, and all of these things then lead to health outcomes like dementia, like I was talking about before. Like there are toxological pathways for these to exist, and there has been research on that before. And now that we're seeing it, now we have the population health to back it up, where we're like, look at this giant exposed population and look at these higher rates of Alzheimer's and dementia. And like correlation does not equal causation, but we're seeing these patterns that make sense. It's dangerous in the sense of something like this happens and there are reduced services. Someone getting sick could be even worse off. Like there are people who have medical devices that need to be plugged in. There are people who have medicine who needs to stay refrigerated. And so like these first of all, pre-existing conditions or pre-existing systems we have in place are only more heavily taxed when there's a wildfire happening, and especially when it's blowing through at a rate that's unmanageable to quell.
And that's the thing is that I think a lot for the LA fires, everybody's, it's the Palisades. They're gonna be fine. They've got to, but what if that person has money, but they live like alone and they can't, and they're old and they can't get out of there. They need help, and like there's a lot of factors that go into being reactive quickly.
And something that I don't want to be overlooked is like the trauma that is involved with this, how human suffering that's happening, which then leads to actual PTSD, chronic stress, anxiety of never feeling comfortable in one's home location. The feeling of solastalgia is basically a term of your environment. I should just say your environment being impacted or changed, whether that be through climate change.
Mhm.
I'm looking at it right now in the scope of natural gas, oil and natural gas development in Texas and how that has changed people's landscape and changed their natural environment. It's a big thing in Wyoming too, just places where there's a high value on the beauty of nature, an appreciation for nature, and how climate change is threatening that, threatening them and threatening what they see as like their home, like the actual land.
What would you say is the scope of the database that you're building, and how are you kind of going beyond CAL FIRE and Red Books and people that already have this type of information available?
There's no like national entity doing this basically, which is what we're trying to supplement with the national data set. These different resources are not private. They're just all spread out and like some have more than others. And so what we did was then like bring it all together, get rid of duplicates. It is a big range of quality of data, which can be frustrating. Like, for example, I will say cleaning and understanding FEMA data is a lot more difficult than BLM's data, like the Bureau of Land Management's data. And it varies by region in the US too.
Mm.
Whereas like states like Florida have a lot of wildfires, but it's still not as centralized and organized.
How does the GIS database you're developing help researchers, policymakers, or communities better understand wildfire impacts?
I think the biggest thing is almost even starting at the community level, which is what I find most important, and just being able to give data back to the people. And like what we should be doing as scientists is like not just keeping all of this information in journals or in like a higher pedestal, but like letting people know like you can track the history of your area. You can look up these risks. Like I know when I'm gonna eventually in a million years buy a house, I'm going to consider the past wildfire history, the past, all the natural disasters. And so, in terms of on an individual level, I'm hoping that this could be something that people really use.
Yeah, it's really important for communities to know about what are the natural disaster risks in their area. I know firsthand in Los Angeles, we knew that wildfires are a thing, but we didn't, or nobody was prepared for them to reach our house. And
Mhm.
I know that my family is taking precautions and we're putting aside things if we need to, if a wildfire jumps to our location because we're right next to the mountains, how can we be out of there fast enough and save the things that and the people and the pets and everything that we love?
On a like policy level, I think it is just very visually alarming to see something of this magnitude. And that's where I'm hoping it's like in the sentiment of it all, it's like, okay, we need to do something about this for real. We need to like actually make better policy regulation across the country, not just because California has, as I mentioned, a lot in place already. They've been dealing with this for years, but it's starting to be a problem all over. New Mexico, like Oklahoma, Florida also has a lot of fires, and so it's just like realizing that this is not an isolated issue, and then also hopefully being able to tailor policy to the community based on what the data set has found. So if like there are in the past 10 years multiple fires that are happening in like the same rural community in Georgia, like that could be then like use that information and that wildfire history from the data set could be used to better like tailor plans or create preventative plans for that specific community. And then researchers, I think a big thing with a national wildfire data set with this like large of content is going to just be able to like have researchers do more powerful studies that are more accurate, more specifically tailored to their like location or their question they're looking at, and make it easier for people to do this research where they don't have to go to 20 different websites and download and do it all themselves.
So the 2025 wildfires, people are quoting it to be one of the biggest, most costly natural disasters in the continental United States. What are the implications of your work in this data set for the 2025 Los Angeles wildfires?
I think that what's happening right now is just further evidence that this is something that needs to be like heavily tracked and updated frequently and maintained. And in a way where right now, I'll say specifically in LA, they're doing a very good job of providing people with information. CAL FIRE gives out almost even hourly incident reports. Evacuation zones are very clear, but something that is missing is that information sort of goes away once it changes. And we need to be able to, just as quickly as that is being put out, retain that information and then start to use it to even do rapid responses or rapid grants. It's harder to address the immediate with research because research is naturally a process that needs a lot of like checks and that type of stuff. But with modern technology nowadays, it's becoming easier to retain that information and create a rapid response that's extremely tailored to the situation specifically, which can save more lives, save more structures, and that type of stuff. My biggest worry is that it's always my worry in America is that this is going to be used as something to divide people further, which I think is not what we should be taking out of this. I think it's important to understand everybody's in a unique position and like look at it from an equity standpoint, but then also have human compassion.
You can find Elizabeth and Dr. Joan Casey's dataset at the link in this episode's notes, as well as some resources for fire victims and people in Los Angeles. I'm Mary Crockett. Thanks for listening.